Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we are diving headfirst into the thrilling, incredibly high-stakes arms race of global fortification engineering. You know, when most of us hear the word castle, we instantly picture royalty, lavish banquets, and, I don't know, a bit of romance. But the reality? Well, the reality is far more brutal and absolutely brilliant.
So, let's just shatter a massive myth right off the bat. Castles weren't these static, glamorous homes. Not at all. They were dynamic, fiercely evolving survival machines built for one specific purpose: to counter constant technological threats. They were heavy-duty military fortresses, political headquarters, and basically the ultimate refuge when everything went wrong during a war. Every single time a new weapon was invented, engineers literally had to completely redesign their defenses just to survive.
We've got a ton of ground to cover, so here's our quick roadmap. We're going to hit the origins of earth and wood, the major shift to stone, the anatomy of a siege, concentric castles, global strongholds, and finally, how gunpowder changes absolutely everything.
To ground ourselves before we get into the really gritty mechanics of all this, let's just take a step back and track how human engineering constantly adapted to new weaponry across thousands of years. It's wild to see how we start with basic prehistoric hill forts, see a massive spike in complexity around the Norman conquest in 1066, hit a peak with massive stone keeps in the 1100s, and then a radical, total shift in design by the 1600s. Okay, part 1. Origins. Earth and wood, the very first fortifications. Let's look at the earliest, fastest solutions people came up with to deal with sudden invasions. Long before the medieval castles of Europe even existed, ancient civilizations universally relied on three really basic steps to use height and distance to slow attackers down. Whether we're talking about the Celts, the Britons, or early Mesopotamians, the fundamental logic was exactly the same. Force your enemy to exhaust themselves climbing up, while you comfortably shoot down at them. It's simple, but man was it effective. Moving into part 2, the shift to stone, fire and force. Because of course, attackers adapt, which meant defenders had to completely rethink their building materials.
Think about the classic Norman motte-and-bailey. It was essentially a wooden tower on an artificial dirt mound. Super cheap, very fast to build after 1066. But it had a fatal flaw. Wood burns. Attackers could easily torch them. This glaring weakness forced a rapid architectural evolution toward permanent, fire-resistant stone keeps, featuring walls that were often an unbelievable 10 to 30 feet thick.
And here is the arms race perfectly in action. Early stone towers were square, but square towers had weak corners, and attackers quickly figured out they could dig underneath those corners and collapse the whole structure. So engineers evolved. They started building rounded fortresses. Why? Because round walls deflected impacts from catapult stones way better, they gave defenders wider angles of fire, and they practically eliminated that exact tunneling tactic. Just a brilliant pivot. All right, part 3. Anatomy of a siege, attack versus defense. Because naturally, building a massive, indestructible stone wall just encouraged attackers to build even more terrifying weapons to break them down.
It's literally like a high-stakes game of architectural chess. Look at this matchup. For every offensive nightmare, like the counterweight trebuchet launching huge stones or even diseased animals over the walls, defenders engineered a direct countermeasure to keep those walls standing. Battering rams stopped dead by wide moats. Mining and tunneling completely blocked by building on solid rock foundations.
Now, attackers usually targeted the gatehouse because, well, a door is naturally the weakest point of a wall. To counter this, defenders essentially turned the entrance into a deadly obstacle course. They equipped it with retractable drawbridges and heavy dropping grates called portcullises to instantly trap an assault party inside narrow, twisting passageways. You really did not want to be the first guy charging in there.
And if you were trapped in that gatehouse, you had to face the appropriately named murder holes. I actually want to bust a massive Hollywood myth right here. Movies always show defenders pouring boiling oil down these holes. But in reality, they dropped heavy rocks, they dropped hot sand, they poured boiling water, but rarely, if ever, boiling oil. Because oil was simply way too expensive to waste on invaders. Boiling water or hot sand slipping through the gaps in a knight's armor got the job done just fine.
Which brings us to part 4, concentric castles, peak defense. As the Crusades exposed Europeans to advanced Byzantine and Islamic engineering, the architectural arms race reached its absolute zenith.
The pure genius of the concentric design, think of places like the famous Beaumaris Castle, is that it's literally a castle within a castle. If attackers somehow miraculously breached the outer wall, well, they weren't actually inside the stronghold. Instead, they found themselves completely trapped in a lethal kill zone, taking heavy fire from defenders positioned on an even higher inner wall. It was a perfectly designed trap. Moving to Part 5, Global Strongholds. It is absolutely crucial to realize this engineering arms race wasn't just happening in Europe. It was a universal human phenomenon.
The underlying survival logic applies across the globe. While Japan's stunning white-towered Himeji Castle and the Middle East's mighty citadel of Aleppo look completely different from a European keep, the math keeping the people inside alive is identical. Himeji used confusing maze-like approaches to entirely disorient attackers, while Aleppo relied on massive sloped walls to prevent climbing and mining. Different aesthetics for sure, but the exact same brilliant defensive logic.
Finally, Part 6. Gunpowder changes all. Because just when defenders thought they had perfected the ultimate stronghold, the attackers invented the ultimate cheat code. High stone walls, which were absolutely brilliant against ladders and arrows for centuries, simply shattered under the brute force of artillery fire. It's crazy, but the very height that once kept castles safe overnight made them giant, brittle, unmissable targets for cannons. Everything had to change. To survive gunpowder, castles had to literally sink into the earth. They transformed from these towering stone giants into low, ultra-thick, mathematically complex structures known as star forts. The angled bastions of a star fort were specifically designed to gracefully deflect cannonballs rather than trying to absorb that massive kinetic energy head-on. This geometric revolution completely signaled the end of the classic medieval castle era.
And that brings us to the biggest takeaway of our explainer today. A castle wasn't just a building. It was a mirror, reflecting thousands of years of human adaptation and technological struggle. Every single time a devastating new weapon appeared, human engineering relentlessly stepped up to meet the challenge. That constant, urgent drive to protect ourselves against the absolute latest technology, it never stopped. Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought to chew on. With the era of high stone walls long behind us, how exactly are we building our strongholds today? Are our modern castles found in complex cybersecurity networks, subterranean bunkers, or somewhere else entirely? Thanks so much for exploring the incredible, high-stakes evolution of fortifications with me today. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.